Welcome to the Patriots Pulse post-game show. I'm your host, John Serenitas, and this week I'm being joined by Alan Siegel from CBS Sports. Alan, how are you this evening?
I am doing fine, John. We just spent the last 4 hours here at Gillette Stadium watching something that is characterized as a football game, but was not a football game.
No, and I would agree, Alan. I wouldn't call it a football game either. This was a really, really disappointing performance. Patriots lose 40-7 to the Los Angeles Chargers. And to Alan's point, this was never a game. It was never in question. And I kind of want to start there, Alan. I mean, this thing got off to a rough start to begin with. Patriots' first possession, Drake May scrambling out of the pocket, runs down the Chargers sideline, gets hit by rookie corner Cam Hart, knocked out of the game for a series. For a while there, it looked like he may be done for the day. He went into the blue tent, later went into the locker room. In many ways, they were already trailing 7-0 at that point. That kind of set the tone for the rest of the day. It snowballed from there. And it was an ugly enough performance that, to me, it was on par with that New Orleans Saints loss here last year where they lost 34-0, that ugly loss in Dallas. I would say that this loss, it probably resides in the same neighborhood as those losses. It was ugly, and it really was never, ever a game.
Well, the problem is, John, unfortunately, is that it comes in the wake of last week, where last week they were in the game. They had a good effort. They lost to a superb team in Buffalo, no doubt about that. But they showed up. They were competitive. They were not competitive today at all. And I agree with you with the beginning part of it with Drake May getting hurt. But I also saw some things out there on the field that disturbed me a little bit. I saw some players, at least from my angle up top in the press box from watching it, that I didn't see players finish blocks. I saw players miss tackles. I did not see, and granted, I can't get inside a player's head with whether there's effort or not. But from my vantage point, there was a lack of effort on several players' part. And I'm not going to mention names, but I'm talking in general because it just seems that there was a complete disconnect in this game.
No, I think you bring up a good point, Alan, and I think that to a degree, that sentiment was echoed in the locker room after the game where there was just this consensus attitude of we didn't show up, we didn't come to play. There was a level of disappointment, especially coming off the heels of what was arguably their best performance of the season last week in a 24-21 loss to the Buffalo Bills up in Orchard Park, that there was just this feel like they didn't get off the bus. And it just, one player told me flat out, we were flat. We didn't come to play. It's just that simple. We're better than that score indicates. We just simply were flat. We weren't engaged, he said to me. We didn't come to play. And I think ultimately that would seem to be the universal sentiment in this one, is that they just didn't show up. And I asked that same player, I said, look, is it because of the change in routine? Is it because you guys were playing on a Saturday as opposed to a Sunday? Would that have had an effect on it? And he said, no, we get paid to play pro football. We need to show up. It's our job. And we did. And I think that right there in a nutshell tells you all you need to know about this football team. And even after the game, Alan, you saw it with Gerard Mayo. You were there. He didn't have much to say. Bottom line is he kept harping on consistency. But this was an awful, awful effort by a team that at various points this season, when they haven't played well, you can point to a lack of talent in a specific area and say, hey, they might not be that good in that area and they got beat. But you haven't been able to really question their effort today. And I think this is why the fan backlash, by the way, has been what it's been since the end of this game. Their effort was not there. You can make the argument that they quit on their coach, at least for today. We'll find out next week if they've wrapped it up for the season. But for today, absolute dog crap effort. It wasn't there. Mayo knows it. The players know it. And he needs to figure it out this week and get them back on track next Sunday when the Bills come to town.
Got a quick question for you, and only before I get to some points I want to make. Was this player you're talking to, was this an off-the-record comment, or was this during his public talking to a lot of the media?
No, it was an off-the-record comment.
Okay.
By the player. Yep.
Okay. If you take a look, John, at some of the stats here, and I've got them right here. You take a look at third down efficiency. 10 of 17 for 59% for Los Angeles, 2 of 10 for the Patriots, 0 and 3 on fourth down, 2 of 2 on fourth down for the Chargers. Total net yards, 428 for Los Angeles or the Chargers. I'm saying Los Angeles because I want to say San Diego. For the Chargers, 181 for the Patriots. Net yards rushing, another big gain day by the Patriots defensive line, allowing 147 yards. Funny thing, the runners, most of the time they did keep some things in check, but just they kept pounding and couldn't stop them. Patriots only gained 96 yards on the ground. Net yards passing, 281 for the Chargers and only 85 for the Patriots. And penalties, 7 of 60. And here is the big thing, time of possession. 40 minutes, 34 seconds for the Chargers, only 19 minutes, 26 seconds for the Patriots, more than 2-1. And John, I know we have read and seen comments that the Crafts want to keep Gerard Mayo, that they want to keep some consistency. And up until today, I have felt that. But this is the kind of game that, quite frankly, gets coaches fired, gets staffs fired, because there was a complete, as you said, they just seemed a lack of effort. They were never in the game. Why were they never in the game? You know, Kendrick Bourne said that they were prepared, but they didn't do anything. So there's a definite disconnect between the coaching staff and the players. And you could see it today. You can hear it today in the locker room. You can hear it today in the press conference. This is going to be a very interesting week and the next 10 days because, as I said, this game completely goes against what you want to see from a team coming down the stretch. Yeah, they do have a lack of talent. There's no doubt about it. There's a lack of talent. And they have to get some more talent. But they also have to get players that want to play, and they also have to get a coaching staff that can get through to the players. Whether this one is the right staff or not, I don't know. At different times, there's been some improvement with this team, but today a complete lack of everything. But you can't. The only play that was positive today was a play on a free play that Drake May hit Pop Douglas, who made a great move on a play, and that was a lucky play. But that's it. Nothing else really was good for this team today.
No, you bring up a great point, and I think that this performance will rehash some of the talk about Gerard Mayo's job security and whether or not he should be the head football coach here moving forward. I still say this, Alan. I think they're going to hold on to him. I think they're going to give him another year. But I think after today, after a performance like this, I think you're going to see staff changes. And I know a lot of people are going to point to Alex Van Pelt, and they're going to say that he potentially could be the first casualty if Mayo overhauls the staff this offseason. But you also have to question DeMarcus Covington and the performance of this defense. This defense has regressed mightily from what we've seen in recent years. As bad as they were the last 2 years, going 8-9, 4-13, the defense was still your bell cow. You can hang your hat on your defense to keep you in games. Even last year, they laid some eggs last season, but they also had some top flight performances, including against this Chargers team that only beat him 6-0. So, again, I know that it's going to rehash a lot of the Gerard Mayo job security talk, but I still, in the end, don't see the Crafts making a change. I don't see Robert Kraft saying, "Oops, my bad. For the first time in my life, was my gut feeling was wrong. I got this wrong." I just don't see it happening. Now, if they lose next week and they get blown out again, especially if Buffalo's playing backups, maybe then it's a legitimate topic of conversation. But even after today, I still think they hold on to him. I do think, though, after today, to your point about being prepared to play, I do think that they are going to make staff changes. I almost think they have to. Now, look, as far as DeMarcus Covington is concerned, I don't see them moving off of him, but I could see them bringing in a veteran former defensive coordinator, kind of like Ben McAdoo on offense, that can come in and be kind of an overseer of the defense. But he's been here for a while. I think that him and Mayo are tight. I think there's a bond there. I think they're on the same page. I don't see Mayo making a move there. I still don't think Van Pelt is safe, and he certainly didn't do himself any favors today. One of the few drives that they had today where it was actually somewhat of a positive drive, you were in plus territory. He makes a stupid call on the toss reverse that ends up getting botched. I think at the end of the day, he went off of having a good game last week against Buffalo to not calling a good game today. I still think his future is in doubt, but I just don't see the Kraft family, even after a performance like today, Alan, I just don't see them making a move. I think that they're going to give him another year. And quite frankly, I know Patriot fans don't want to hear this. There were fire Mayo chants today. I kind of think they have to. And they put themselves in a corner, but also for the sake of Drake May and the development of this football team, I just don't. You don't want to become a revolving door at head coach. That we know there's a lot of franchises in the last 25, 30 years that have sucked because of that. I don't think Kraft wants to be one of those franchises.
I don't disagree with that, John, at all. And I'm not advocating for Gerard Mayo being fired by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just calling it like it is, that this is the kind of a game that you just can't deal with and expect to go forward and be positive. You take a look at Alex Van Pelt. He has improved some from the beginning of the season, and you have to give him credit for the development of Drake May. You can't go both ways. You can't say, well, he's terrible, whatever, and not give credit for developing Drake May, who among the three rookies that are playing a lot, he's playing very, very well. I mean, today notwithstanding. And by the way, Drake May took responsibility for that fumble and that toss to Pop Douglas. And he said, we practiced it, just a bad toss. He took responsibility. I like the young man. I like the fact that he takes responsibility. He doesn't back down from it. And that is a sign of maturity for this kid. And you have to like that going forward, because they've got the piece that needs to be in place with the quarterback. I agree with you, DeMarcus Covington, in terms of a very strong bond with Gerard Mayo, who was the only coach that Gerard Mayo hired. The rest were hired by Elliott Wolf. And in terms of whether Gerard would do something with that, I don't know. But certainly you have to look into Juwan Bentley not being here, Jabril Peppers not being here for most of the season, Christian Barmore in and out. You look at some others in terms of situations. Today, unfortunately, early they lose Christian Gonzalez to a concussion, and I still have questions about why they were in a certain defensive positions in terms of the defensive backfield early in this game, and why Christian Gonzalez, who I liken to Mike Haynes, and I think he's that good and will be an all-pro someday, why he was just not on Ladd McConkey playing him one-on-one. That remains to be seen. But, there's nothing positive to bring out of today. And looking forward, that they have a lack of talent. And, Bill Belichick takes blame on this. I know people think he's a good coach, and he still can coach. But as a general manager over the last 3 years, the barrel got emptied. There's not a lot of talent in this team. And the coaches knew it before the season began. There's no doubt about that. And people will say, well, why did they re-sign so many players? Because you can't get all new players. You can't have 35 players new coming into a team. You got to have just some kind of continuity, especially at first year. For next year, all bets are off.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you bring up a great point, Alan, about Bill Belichick, because I know it's easy to be revisionist and say, well, if Bill were here, they wouldn't be this bad on defense. If Bill were here, they'd be this, they'd be that. Well, when Bill was here, they went 10-7. They went 7-9, 10-7, made the playoffs, got blown out by Buffalo Max rookie year, then followed that up with 8-9 and 4-13. So his last 4 years in New England, Belichick had a losing season in 3 of 4 of those years. And you hit 1,000-foot home run. The current condition of this roster is on him. At the end of the day, you can sit here and say whatever you want about Elliott Wolf and Gerard Mayo. The majority of the players that are still on this roster were brought in by Bill Belichick, the general manager. And we all know that Bill Belichick, the general manager, screwed over Bill Belichick, the coach, mightily, especially the last 5 years. So, again, I'm not making excuses for Mayo or Wolf or this coaching staff, but I think to sit here and say, okay, one and done, he's got to go, Kraft has got to admit his mistake and move on, that's fine. But I think it's too late, Alan. I think that train has left the station. I don't think it does anybody any good right now to move off of Gerard Mayo. The bottom line is that the process wasn't what it should have been last offseason. They should have interviewed other candidates. They should have gone through a process and then hired Mayo. But to simply say, all right, we're moving on from Belichick, mutual parting, and then 4 days later you hire Gerard Mayo. That never made sense to me. I said it then and I'll say it now. They did themselves a disservice. There were guys out there like Jim Harbaugh, like him or not, that you should have interviewed. You should have brought him in because while he's a big personality, the guy is a freaking winner. He wins. And look what he's done with this Chargers team in 1 year. They're 10-6, and they look legit. If they get into the playoffs, this style of play plays in January and February. You can win a playoff game or two playing the way they do.
One word when it comes to Jim Harbaugh: fundamentals. This team that we saw today in front of us was fundamentally sound. I did not see a real mistake they made all game long, to be very frank about it. They did not make mistakes. They did not come close to beating themselves at all in terms of an individual drive or an individual play.
You just hit the nail on the head. I couldn't agree with you more. And I said this to a bunch of people when we were going downstairs after the game, that to me, when you look at this game, it came down to one thing: fundamentals and physicality. They were bigger, they were tougher, they were stronger, and it showed up. The Chargers have 3 first-rounders on that offensive line. Okay, Rashawn Slater, Zion Johnson, and Joe Alt. And those guys, when they needed to make a key block in a key situation in the run game, they did it. Justin Herbert had excellent time. The Patriots couldn't muster up a pass rush to save their life. And a big reason for that is that's arguably, if not the best offensive line in the league. It is easily one of the 5 best on par with Detroit and Philadelphia.
And they had 2 starters out today. They were without 2 starters today and completely outplayed the Patriots' defensive line.
Yeah, which is huge. You know, Trey Pipkins out for them at right guard. I mean, again, it speaks to the talent gap here. When you look at where the Patriots are and you look at where a team like the Chargers are, and the Chargers, let's be honest here, it's year 1 of Jim Harbaugh. They're not a finished product. This isn't going to be the Super Bowl contending LA Chargers. Him and Joe Ortiz have a lot of work to do to get this roster to where they want it, but this is a good football team that could end up winning a wild card game, ending up in the divisional round. They're that good. Taking a look at some of the numbers here, Drake May, 12 of 22, 117 yards and a touchdown pass. He was sacked 4 times for 30 yards. Patriots running game, 96 yards rushing total. Antonio Gibson led the way with 12 for 63. Ramondre Stevenson, 2 carries for a yard. Of course, before the game, Gerard Mayo, on his weekly appearance on 98.5 The Sports Hub, intimated that Antonio Gibson was going to get the start. I think Ramondre Stevenson got it. I mean, again, this is part of Mayo's problem.
He did. He did get the start, Ramondre Stevenson, and Gerard Mayo was asked after the game about that specifically, and he just said, coach's decision. Somebody asked him what went into the coach's decision. He just said, coach's decision. So why he did it, I don't know. John, there's one other thing, too, that has really irked me, and that was missed tackles. There's nothing on the stat sheet that says how many missed tackles they had, but they were missed tackles. They took bad angles with different players, allowed more yardage than they need to. There were some good plays, but for the most part, it just was a horrendous performance.
No, I agree with you, Alan. And I think the missed tackles, the poor run fits, the bad pursuit angles, it's been a problem for this football team all season. We've talked about it ad nauseum, and it reared its ugly head again today. And to your point, you saw it. You saw it at various points in this game, especially on a 3rd and short when they needed to get a stop. Missed tackle, bad run fit, first down Chargers. They just couldn't get off the field. Los Angeles abused them in the passing game in the middle of the field. They were consistently able to hit crossing routes. They were able to get first downs when they needed them in the passing game. Justin Herbert had a terrific day at the office, if you will. 26 of 38 for 281 yards, 3 touchdown passes. He becomes the first quarterback. He actually is now, he's thrown for more yards, I should say, in his first 5 seasons in the league than any other quarterback, surpassing Peyton Manning. So obviously a big reason why Jim Harbaugh took this job is Justin Herbert. He's the real deal. He looked like the real deal today.
Yeah, and let's at least give Drake May one thing. And he broke the record for Patriots rookies in terms of most touchdown passes in consecutive games. Today, that touchdown pass to Pop Douglas was the 8th in a row. and we'll see if he gets it next week against Buffalo. One thing about next week against Buffalo, and by the way, the early forecast for next Sunday is for 32 degrees, partly cloudy, so it's not going to be bad weather. And it'll be interesting to see how many fans show up because, quite frankly, today the stands, I'd say 75% full, maybe something along that line. But next week they're going to go against the Bills for the second time in 3 weeks. But if the Bills win tomorrow against the Jets, their spot is locked in for number 2 in the AFC in terms of the playoff seeding. So it'll be interesting to see if Buffalo plays their regulars at all. I know in the past that McDermott has played his players for a little bit just to keep them going and then pulled them out. So next week certainly will not be a game against a team that needs to win, and we'll see what the Patriots do because, quite frankly, next week, show up, play hard, try to play fundamentally sound, and then go into the offseason.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think at the end of the day, next week is really, in many ways, it's an evaluation game for the Patriots. It's an evaluation game for Elliott Wolf. It's an evaluation game for Gerard Mayo and this coaching staff. They've got to see what they have coming back next year. And it's not necessarily the guys that are free agents and whether or not you're going to re-sign them. It's more about the guys that are going to be on the roster that are under contract. You have some legitimate decisions to make here. Obviously, Elliott Wolf, this front office felt that it was important to re-sign a lot of the guys that were already in the building, Michael Onwenu and Kyle Duggar and Ramondre Stevenson and so forth. But now you have to ask yourself, I mean, you're staring down the barrel of a 3-14 season. Are these the right guys? And so I think in many ways, Alan, this is an evaluation game for the Patriots. They need to see if they've got the right guys here. And look, they're going to be aggressive in free agency. They're going to have a bunch of money to spend. It's going to be interesting to see if anybody takes their money. I think it's going to be a hard sell. I think you're going to have to spend $1.25 on the dollar, if you will, to get free agents to come here. It's not going to be an easy sell, even with Drake here and his potential. And this draft class, I don't think is elite. I don't think it's a blue chip draft class. I think you can get some good players, and every draft class ends up producing a blue chipper or a few of them. But on the surface right now, looking at it at face value, this isn't a great class. So unfortunately for the Patriots, you're going to have to really, and I've said this to people, as soon as that game's over next Sunday, Alan, you put the for sale sign on that number 2 or 3 pick if you end up securing one of those 2 picks, and you upsell the crap out of that pick because they need to trade down. They need more picks. They need more players. This roster has a lot of holes in it. You're not going to fix this team at the 2nd or the 3rd pick taking a player there, not in my opinion anyway. And again, I don't think there's enough blue chip talent in this draft class anyway. But I think at the end of the day, next Sunday is really going to be about not only evaluating young guys and depth guys to see if they're worth bringing them back, but also the veteran guys on this team. And real quick, just to kind of build off of a point you made about the crowd today, about 75% full. Honestly, man, after today's performance, I don't know, Alan, if this place will be if it'll be half empty next week. It's going to be 32 degrees and cold. Not for nothing. They're 3-13. Why are people going to come out here on a day like that and sit through that, especially if Buffalo doesn't play their starters?
Well, to be honest with you, there are some great Patriots fans in this region. They love the Patriots. There's no doubt about that. I'm going to take your talk about next week being evaluation. I think it's the evaluating has gone on for the last 4 or 5 weeks, quite frankly, and that's just going to continue it and be another peg, in terms of the evaluation pie, so to speak. Because you can't just do it on one game. That they know, like for instance, like today, it's very interesting to me today that through most of the game, your wide receivers were Kendrick Bourne, Kayshon Boutte, and Pat Douglas. It wasn't until there were 6 minutes and 34 seconds left that we saw Jalen Polk and Javon Baker come into the game. And at that point, Jacoby Brissett was in as quarterback anyway. So and I think that is telling. Today, they did not use the tight ends at all. In fact, as I take a look at the receiving for the Patriots, Hunter Henry had 2 and Hooper had 3. So the only 5 receptions out of the 23 went to the tight ends today. It's going to be very interesting. Like I said, I will let's something. Talk about the offensive line today for a little bit. Granted, they were 4 sacks and they didn't do well on the outside of the line. But I'll tell you something, John. I was watching Cole Strange all day, and he played well. He really did in his first time that we've seen him at center. Made some blocks. There were not any kind of snap situations or snap problems between Cole Strange and Drake May. And maybe this says something about developing some depth along the line. Cole Strange played well today. There's no doubt about it. And if you want to take a look at the line, Cole Strange is someone I want to find out more about. Caden Wallace, is another player. Leighton Robinson, Mike Onwenu. That to me stops. So don't forget, David Andrews hopefully will be back next year too. And then we'll see whether they go for the draft for the offensive line or they go free agency for the offensive line. And you mentioned the draft pick. Okay, unless the Giants somehow win out, they're going to have the number 1 pick. And they're going to be picking most likely Shedeur Sanders as a quarterback. They need a quarterback, which means that at number 2, the Patriots are going to control the draft.
No, absolutely. And that's why I said I would put a for sale sign on that pick as soon as January 6th rolls around, because you want to put it out there. Hey, we're willing to sell the pick. And for me, anything less than what Miami got from San Francisco for Trey Lance, it would be unacceptable. I don't care that this isn't as good a quarterback class as that was in 2021. I still think Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, probably top 5, top 10 picks. There's going to be enough teams that need quarterbacks that are going to be willing to move up to draft one of those guys. And so at the end of the day, if they end up with the number 2 pick, I think it's huge. I think it's huge because you can use it to restock this roster. Forget about taking Travis Hunter. I know Patriot fans want that. I know they view him as a number 1 receiver. I know they view him as a potential weapon for Drake May. But he can also play corner for you. He's not locked in as a receiver, and he wants to play both ways, which I personally don't think is going to last very long. But I do think at the end of the day, you're going to be in a pretty good spot to add picks that you need to recalibrate and restock this roster. Now, the question is, do you want Elliott Wolf in this front office making those picks? Again, when we talk about changes, I don't see a change at head coach. I don't see Elliott Wolf not being the final decision maker. Could there be some front office changes potentially going into the draft and especially after the draft? Sure. But I don't think you're going to see Elliott Wolf not at least be involved in the decision-making process. And look, if you're Robert Kraft, I'm sure he's going to put out a statement after the season saying that this season wasn't unacceptable and it's below our standard and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, you got to put your money where your mouth is. If it's below your standard, some changes need to be made. You may not necessarily make changes at the top, but some changes are going to need to be made, Alan, to get this ship righted. In other words, if you're going to keep DeMarcus Covington, bring in a veteran defensive coach who's been a coordinator for years, even a head coach who can oversee the defense and help him. If you're going to make changes on offense, fine, then move off of Van Pelt, even though I agree with you, he's done a good job developing May. So move off of him if you feel that that's going to help this team and bring in someone who's young with fresh ideas who can get more out of May and this offense. But the bottom line, some changes are going to need to be made here in terms of this team moving forward. Otherwise, you can't go into next season with 75% of this roster, 80% of this roster, and the same people at the top. Some changes need to be made, at least underneath them.
I guarantee you that we're not going to go in next year with the same roster and actually the same coaching staff. I'm not saying where those changes are going to be. I don't know. If someone were to put me up against the wall and say, what do you really think? I think Gerard Mayo will be here because I think the Crafts want to give him another shot and give him some continuity. I think because of what he's done with Drake May, AVP will be here. Other than that, I think that anything is possible after those two. Will it happen that way? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. And it's always interesting when you have the money and when you control the purse strings, you control what happens to your team and your possession. And this is owned by Robert Kraft and Jonathan Kraft, and we'll see what they do. It's going to be fascinating, quite frankly. Starting next Sunday at about 4:15 when the season ends, what direction this team is going to go.
Well, I mean, after today, they better chart a pretty clear course right after the season ends. this fan base, you're starting to lose them now, Alan. That's the thing. You're starting to lose them now. I think the last couple of years they were hanging on, hoping that there would be a restoration of the glory days. But I think you're starting to lose them now. And I think they're going to need to be aggressive this offseason, both in terms of free agency, the draft, to your point about personnel and who's doing what. They need to show this fan base, this ownership group needs to show this fan base that they're not going to stand for the losing anymore, that they're going to live up to the standard that they've set, and they're going to do everything they can to get this thing turned around. And again, I think in order to turn this around, to be honest with you, and I don't care about next week, because we all know, especially if Buffalo wins tomorrow, they're not going to play their starters much, if any, at all. Even if you win next week, it's fool's gold. Who cares? At the end of the day, I'm ready to talk about the offseason and next season now. Forget about next week. In my opinion, they have to do something this offseason beyond just Wolf and Mayo, as I said earlier. They have to be aggressive. They have to be willing to overpay for free agents. They have to be willing to make trades. They have to be willing to trade that pick, whether it's the second, third, or fourth pick. They have to be willing to do these things, because the status quo is not good enough. And let's not kid ourselves, Alan. Tom Brady hasn't been here in 5 years. That ship, forget about that ship sailing. That ship is now on the other side of the Pacific. So I think we need to be realistic here. This thing has been trending downhill now for a while. The Crafts can't put their hands over their ears anymore and start humming. They need to address the flaws of this football team, and it has to start right away. You cannot let the Celtics and the Bruins dominate the headlines. You have to be the headline dominator. Get out in front of it and show this fan base that you're serious about fixing it. Because I'm telling you, 75% of this stadium being empty, that's going to become the norm next season if this team comes out of the gate sucking.
I can't put it in many better words than you just did, John. That is for sure. So be aggressive. You're going to have to overpay for free agents. If you want to get a guy like T. Higgins, you're going to have to overpay. And who knows if T. Higgins even wants to come here. Ridley didn't. Ayuk didn't want to come here. They made offers. They made legitimate offers, but those two didn't want to come here. Now, granted, you've got a quarterback like Drake May, who's young and quite frankly is getting a reputation around the league as being a pretty good young quarterback who is going to be on the rise. You need to surround him. Like I said, that is the first key part to any team, the quarterback. They've got an NFL quarterback. Now you're surrounded with the line. Now you're surrounded with talent and playmakers. They don't have playmakers on this team. They need playmakers. And to have playmakers, you need, like I said, a solid offensive line. A famous coach once said to me, the foundation of any team is the offensive line. That's how he built his teams, and that's why he had success. And that's why that coach is in the Hall of Fame right now. And so, to me, get the offensive line, because that controls you. That gives a quarterback time to go back and look the whole field over. And that gives receivers time to create space for themselves. So they've got to be aggressive, but they've got to be aggressive in a smart way. Not spend money for the sake of spending money, but spend it in a very smart way. And we'll see what happens, John.
And of course, that Hall of Fame coach was Bill Parcells. So there you go. We do have a text comment for the show. I feel the missed tackles might have been business decisions, not playing hard in the game that got away from them fast. Yeah. Well, I think we're in that time of the year now. We're in business decision season where guys are saying, I don't know if I want to end up finishing the season on IR and with an injury. I want to go into the offseason healthy so I can get into the offseason program. And if they're a free agent, they want to position themselves to have a job next season and beyond. So, yeah, I do think that, unfortunately, fair or not fair, it is business decision season. I think a lot of guys, I'm not saying that these guys, are cowards and they wussed out. All I'm saying is I do think that, especially when it's a 30-7 game in the third quarter, you may not necessarily put your best foot forward from an effort standpoint, and that's understandable. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is it speaks to the end of the season here. They're playing out the string. They just need to get through the season. Before we wrap it up, though, I do want to come back to Cole Strange. I did talk to to Cole after the game, and he felt pretty good about being back. He was happy to be back. He told me that he felt good getting those extra reps now before the season ends. He's been out about a year now. He felt comfortable at center. He felt comfortable with identifying the fronts and the coverages and making the line calls. And he's excited to go into this offseason healthy so that he can get into the weight program. And he's also going to work at center, he told me. So, I had a really good talk with Cole, and I think, to your point, Alan, I thought he played pretty well today. And he knows he's much maligned. He knows that when people talk about the recent draft failures of the Patriots, oftentimes they point to that 2022 draft and they point to him, fair or unfair, because I do think when he has played, even at guard, he has played well at times when he's played. It's just a matter of staying healthy. But overall, he had a pretty positive attitude despite the bad loss.
I know people get upset the fact that he was a first-round pick, and maybe he wasn't a first-round pick, but when he's been in there, for the most part, he's played pretty well in his career. Granted, there's some injuries, but I think he's a piece that can stay and help rather than have to leave and not help.
Couldn't agree with you more. We don't know David Andrews' future. You're talking about a guy that's 6'4", 307 pounds. I mean, if you have a guy that size with that length and that athleticism playing center, he could develop into a potential Pro Bowl center. And I know, again, people are going to say, so what? Who cares? What does it matter? Do you want to have a good offensive line or not? Because here we are talking about how important the offensive line is and how important it is that they get it right up front. Well, if you want them to get it right, you want to be good again, it's going to be on the strength of your offensive line. I think Patriot fans have taken offensive lines of the past, Allen, for granted because and this includes us, right? We were so hyper-focused on Brady and Edelman and Gronk and Amendola and Moss and Welker and Givens and Branch and all those guys, Corey Dillon, Antoine Smith. But the Patriots, when they were the Patriots, had some really good offensive lines. Dante Scarnecchia got a ton of credit, but I've known Scar for a long time, and he would tell you he had some good players. And those players did not get enough credit during those years. They were overshadowed by the other stars.
That's why Tom Brady was Tom Brady. That's why Wes Welker was Wes Welker. That's why Gronk was Gronk, because the offensive line allowed the foundation, allowed them to do what they needed to do. It all starts with that. And, we'll see. Like I said, there's a lot of things in the wish list for this team, and it is going to be a very big offseason for this Patriots team. And let's be honest, folks, even if they have a great turnaround in terms of getting some talent here, it's going to take more than a year to get back to where Patriots fans are used to seeing this franchise.
Couldn't agree with you more, Alan. And I said this to some people downstairs. In fact, we were talking with a group of people prior to Coach Mayo coming out, and we all said it's not just going to be this offseason and boom, you're done. You're back into playoff contention this year. This team is 2 years away from being a consistent, legitimate playoff team.
There's a question that I see from a Lauren who wants to know, should we have gotten Joe Alt last year, or what do we draft the offensive line? My question is, and I don't have the answer to this, do they go free agency for an offensive line, or do they go for the draft for the offensive line? It'll be one or the other. I don't think, or it could be a combination, but you have to decide whether you want to spend offensive line capital for free agency or spend draft capital for the offensive line. I think it's going to come down to that. There's no answer right now. It's not. You made the point earlier. This is not a great draft. I mean, you can still pick up good players, but it is not a very Pro Bowl talented type draft.
First things first, Lauren, thanks for checking in. Appreciate it as always. Our number one fan, and we appreciate you checking in and talking Patriots football with us. She says, I missed the second half, but do we draft the O-line? I still feel we should have gotten Joe Alt last year. I think the world of you, and I respect your takes, but no way on earth am I passing on Jaden Daniels, Drake May, or even Caleb Williams to take Joe Alt. Yeah, I would have taken Joe Alt over Michael Penix and Bo Nix and possibly J.J. McCarthy. He's on the fringe for me. But I wasn't going to pass up on a franchise quarterback to take Joe Alt. It sucks that Joe Alt came out last year, but I think at the end of the day, they made the right pick.
They did. They did. the first thing you do with a team, do they have a good franchise quarterback? They now have that. Now you build around him. It's that simple. Joe Alt, yeah, great player. But the thing is, if Joe Alt is on the line, they're still going to be the same team without a good quarterback. So now they get the quarterback piece. Now they build around him, and then we go from there.
And we have another text comment intimating that Lauren is on a substance. So there you go. Patriot fans, first class all the way. I can vouch for you that Lauren is not on any substances, but I will say this. Again, to Alan's point, it starts with the franchise quarterback. That's the foundational piece to any team in this league, any team that has had and wants to have success. You can always build the offensive line from there, and that should be your focal point because it's the best way to support a young quarterback. But coming back to Joe Alt for a sec, there's no tackle in this draft that's Joe Alt, okay? Will Campbell is not Joe Alt. Banks is not Joe Alt. Some of the other tackles in this draft are not Joe Alt. So I do think there's clearly a step down in that regard. But again, you don't necessarily have to go out and draft that guy. You know, and I've said this all season. You can go out and offer Ronnie Stanley a contract and overpay him and see if Baltimore will match. And if they don't, you give them because they're more than likely going to franchise him. So let me backtrack for a sec. My guess is Baltimore is going to franchise him, but Stanley is a unrestricted free agent. I would offer him a boatload of money. That's what you need, a guy like that can be a franchise left tackle. If you were to get a guy like that in free agency, now you could continue to address other areas in free agency, but now potentially you could go wide receiver in the draft. And this is going to be a good receiver class. I don't think it's last year's class. You know, when I look at the Luther Burdens and the Tetra Toa McMillans, I don't think they're as good as the top of last year's class. I think those guys are probably in the same grouping as Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell. But the bottom line is you can trade down and address those needs in the draft if you get a guy like Ronnie Stanley to play left tackle for you. But the bottom line is you don't pass on Drake May to take Joe Alt. It's just no way.
I agree with you, and I'll give you one last point from me in terms of getting people here, especially free agents that from other teams. You want to bring in good people besides talented people because you want to create a culture in that locker room with leaders that can get people going and get people playing. And I think they lack leadership. I'm not saying that the locker room is in a tumult or really unorganized, because it's not. And I will tell you from talking to players, they still support Gerard Mayo. They really do as a whole. And John talked to people today. I've talked to people. The players that I talked to all said Gerard Mayo has not lost the team, that they like Gerard Mayo. They play hard for Gerard Mayo today, notwithstanding. So they need leaders and they need some quality people coming into that locker room in the future. And I think it all comes in, with what they do in terms of draft picks and free agency for next year. Not just talent, but talent that can lead and you can count on.
Got another text comment here. Even if it's not Alt, if you get an Nate Solder type, that's a huge step forward. I would agree with that. I know I've been saying here now for the last 10 minutes before we go, but before we go, real quick, Davin Gonshaw had some pretty interesting comments after the game. He talked about his support for Gerard Mayo, that he believes in Gerard Mayo, that the team supports Mayo. He also basically called out the fans, saying that it's ridiculous that they were chanting "Fire Mayo," which we could clearly hear the "Fire Mayo" chants in our section beneath where the press box is. One point, I also heard a smattering of "Fire Elliott Wolf" chants. So no one was safe. But just some thoughts, Alan, on Davon Godshaw's comments in regards to Gerard Mayo. I mean, obviously Godshaw's a guy that has a high opinion of himself. He has a high opinion of the type of player he is. But what are your thoughts? Players, including Drake May, did come out last week and also support Mayo and the staff. But just some thoughts on Godshaw's comments.
Well, it goes to what I was saying, that not only Gottschalk, but Drake and other players privately. Most players are not going to come out and chastise a coaching staff and a head coach publicly. Very rarely does that happen. It's what is said in private. It's what is said away from the glare. It's what is said off the record to give you a background of what is going on. And I've yet to hear anybody in the Patriots locker room say anything negative about Gerard Mayo. So I think that he's got the support of the players. The players want to play for him, but are they talented enough to play well for him? That's a different story, and we'll see what happens. It's going to be very, very interesting, John. As I said, starting at about 4:15 next Sunday.
Yeah, and indeed, it will be very interesting. It's going to be a very interesting and busy offseason for the New England Patriots. And before we go here, and I'm surprised this hasn't come up yet, Lauren asks, how about Keon White's comment that was on social media that I saw this week? Well, it's interesting, Lauren, because I got to speak to Keon about it. And Keon basically said to me that he's good with Mayo. He did meet with the media afterwards. And one thing I can say about Keon White, for a young guy, he doesn't shy away from being an open book and being honest. But Keon basically said to me that him and Mayo are good. They talked about it, but he also, to a degree, stands by what he said. And I think that in many ways, you know what? I think they're good now. They're in a good place. But Keon is somebody who, as I said, he tells it like he sees it, and he certainly didn't shy away from it when I talked to him about it.
Well, it's funny because last week when Keon said these things and ended up on social media, I was actually at the press conference, in the Revolution room where they have the TV cameras. And one of the questions, we read Joe Girardi today in another situation. He said, Keon was asked the question about alignment, et cetera. And it was my question where he said no comment. And I just think that Keon is the type of player. He's quiet. He's into himself. And I don't mean that in a negative way. He's hard on himself. But first, when he said he doesn't know what the future's going to be, well, the future's going to be he's going to be here because he's not a free agent until 27. He's under contract for the next 2 years. Keon's going to be here. Keon is going to be a guy that I think improves and has talent and is hard on himself. And it's because he's hard on himself is why he feels this way sometimes. But he's a talented player. And I like a player that, will take responsibility for the way he's playing because he made some mistakes. I'm not saying today, I'm talking about last week. And he took responsibility, but he won't put other people under the bus, which is why he said no comment a couple of times when asked about the defense and about the alignment, et cetera. And that is fine with me. So I think that, Keon is going to be fine, to be very frank. He's a talent. Get him some players around him who'll become even better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. He's not going anywhere. He's going to be here. He's an integral piece of this defense. There's still some good young talent on this defense. Him, Barmore, Christian Gonzalez, obviously. So, he's going to be here. I mean, look, I'm with you. I agree. I love stuff like this. I love that he was open and that he was candid. I think it's who he is. I think he, for the most part, keeps to himself. But he's one of those guys, when he has something to say, he says it. And I think when he speaks, it speaks volume. So good for Keon. Alan, I want to say thank you for taking the time, man, to join us this week, stepping in for John Lyons. Greatly appreciate your insight, your knowledge. Obviously, you've been covering the Patriots for a long, long time. You've been here through the good and the bad. You have great insight, my friend.
Next week will be the end of my 48th year covering this team. So hopefully I can get to 50 and we'll see what happens. But I have seen a lot of football for this franchise, covered it. My first game I actually saw was on a Friday night at Fenway Park in 1963. So I was a fan before I was covering the Patriots. So I've seen a lot of it with this team. I saw them under the Sullivans, under the Crafts. And it's my pleasure. Anytime you need me, I'm here.
Awesome stuff, man. Well, I appreciate it because, like I said, your knowledge of this franchise obviously goes back a long way. And you've, like I said, you've been here through the good and the bad, and you've done a tremendous job covering the Patriots. And we appreciate what you do for New England Football Journal. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Patriots Pulse post-game show. Patriots go down, and they go down hard. The Los Angeles Chargers, 40-7. They wrap up the 2024 season next Sunday at 1 o'clock. I don't see any scenario where that game's flashed.
John, one more thing. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year to you as well, Alan. But in any event, they wrap up the season next Sunday at 1 p.m. here against the Buffalo Bills. For Alan Siegel, I'm John Serenitas. We'll be back with you next week. Until then, have a happy and safe New Year, and we'll talk to you next year. Peace.